Welcome to ZAM Audiobooks. Today we are discussing the book titled How to Think, Speak, and Influence Like a Pro.
And this is honestly such a crucial topic to unpack.
It really is. I mean, imagine walking into a boardroom where your entire career trajectory hinges on just one 10-minute pitch.
Oh, we've all felt that pressure.
Right. And your presentation slides are, mathematically flawless. Your market research is entirely bulletproof. You know the subject matter better than anyone else alive.
But then it all falls apart.
Exactly. Within 10 seconds of opening your mouth before you've even reached your second slide, you've left the room. The executives are checking their phones.
Their eyes glaze over.
Yeah, you can literally feel the energy draining out of the space.
Yeah.
And you have to ask, why does this happen? It's because you fundamentally misunderstood the invisible machinery of human influence.
You prepared the data, but you didn't prepare yourself.
Precisely. If you're listening right now, perhaps you felt that exact phantom slip of control in your own meetings or your negotiations, or even in your personal life.
It's a terrible feeling.
It is. So today, we are tearing down the facade of what most people think communication is. We're bypassing that standard superficial corporate advice. The whole make eye contact and shake hands firmly routine.
Right, we're going much deeper than that.
We're going into the absolute mastery of strategic communication and executive presence.
And that level of mastery requires a complete paradigm shift, because the gap between your unrefined potential and your actualized success is, well, it's entirely filled by your capacity to communicate.
It's the bridge.
Exactly. It's the bridge. I mean, you can possess a generational intellect. You can have the most innovative technical brilliance in your industry. But if you cannot articulate that value with total clarity, unshakable confidence, and conviction,
your potential just stays locked.
Permanently locked in your own head. What we are examining today is the fundamental rewiring of how you process external and how you architect your thoughts in real time, how you physically occupy space, and how you forge genuine psychological alignment with the human beings across the table.
So it's basically a biological and psychological recalibration.
A biological. That perfectly frames where we need.
Because before a single syllable even leaves your lips, your level of influence has already been mathematically calculated by the subconscious minds of everyone observing you.
Absolutely. It is determined by the clarity of your internal state and the physical geometry of your body.
So let's start right there at the bedrock foundation. How does a master actually prepare their internal architect? Because if you observe the average person moving through their professional landscape, they're almost entirely on autopilot.
They are asleep at the wheel of their own reactions. And operating on autopilot is the absolute antithesis of influence.
Let's break down the mechanics of that autopilot brain.
So the human brain is a highly energy intensive. It consumes roughly 20% of the body's caloric burn. So to conserve energy, the brain relies on the default mode network, which is essentially a series of neurological.
Meaning when you're on autopilot, you're not really acting, you're just reacting.
You are at the absolute mercy of immediate emotional spikes, your unexamined biases, environmental pressures.
Like imagine someone directly challenges your day in a high-stakes meeting.
Right. The autopilot response completely bypasses prefrontal, which is your center for logic, and it triggers the amygdala.
You instantly get defensive.
Exactly. Your cortisol levels spike, your heart rate accelerates, your breathing becomes incredibly shallow, and you instinctively start speaking at a rapid, frantic pace just to justify your existence.
Even though the threat is literally just a question about a spreadsheet.
Right. You're reacting to a physical threat. A master, conversely, responds intentionally, and that intentionality is only born from a mind subjected to rigorous training.
So clear thinking is the absolute prerequisite.
Yeah.
You can't have muddled, frantic thoughts and expect to produce pristine, authoritative speech.
The output can only match the quality.
So when we deconstruct this clear thinking, we are really looking at three distinct cognitive muscles, right? Analytical thinking, reflective thinking, and the incredibly rare discipline of suspending judgment.
Let's isolate analytical thinking first. Often people, they relegate this to data science. But in the realm of influence, analytical thinking is the ability to look at a chaotic interpersonal situation, strip away the intense emotional noise, and evaluate the raw architecture of the moment.
It's asking yourself, what is the actual root problem here rather than the loud, distracting symptom?
Precisely. If a client is yelling about a minor missed deadline, the symptom is their anger over the schedule. But the analytical thinker sees past that noise and realizes the root problem is, say, the client's anxiety about looking incompetent to their owners.
You analyze the structure of the conflict, not the emotion, which requires an immense amount of detachment. And that leads directly into the second cognitive muscle, reflective thinking.
Right. If analytical thinking is the lens pointed outward, reflective thinking is turning that exact same high-powered lens inward onto your own psyche.
It's a meta-analysis of your own thoughts.
Exactly. If you're the one being yelled at by the client, Reflective thinking is that real-time pause where you ask yourself, why is my chest tightening right now? Why do I feel the overwhelming snap back?
Am I reacting to the objective facts of the deadline, or is my ego just
That is the pivotal moment of self-regulation, recognizing your own internal machine before it dictates your... Because if you cannot reflect on your ego will drive your mouth.
And this inward reflection naturally facilitates the third, and honestly maybe the most difficult cognitive, suspending judgment.
It really is the hardest. We operate in a corporate culture that heavily incentivizes the fastest. We reward the person who speaks first, the opinion, the immediate counter-argument.
But true, unshakable power lies in the willingness to hold a space of absolute ambiguity.
Yes, it is the psychological fortitude to sit back in your chair, look at a complex situation, and internally declare, I am not going to form a conclusion, and I am certainly not going to vocalize it until I have patiently observed all the moves.
But holding that space of ambiguity is physically uncomfortable for most people, isn't it? I mean, if you're listening to this right now, think about the last time a major unexpected problem landed on your desk.
The immediate biological urge is to solve it instantly.
Yeah, to categorize it, to rush to a conclusion just to eliminate the anxiety of the unknown. Ambiguity feels incredibly unsafe to the primitive brain.
It does. We rush to a conclusion to manufacture a false sense of security. But when you train yourself to master the suspension of judgment, you entirely eliminate that frantic internal scramble.
You eliminate the baseline fear and hesitation that sabotage human speech.
Exactly. Because if you know with absolute certainty that you are operating from a place of gathered evidence, objective analysis, and suspended ego, you don't have to second-guess your own words as they are vibrating.
You're no longer desperately seeking validation from the room in real time.
You are simply presenting a reality that you have carefully and objectively.
And that internal stillness, that lack of frantic scrambling, it instantly translates from the neurological realm into the physical, which brings us to the concept of executive presence.
Executive presence, a term that gets endlessly recycled in leadership.
Usually reduced to wearing a nice suit and giving a firm handshake.
Right, which completely misses.
But the core defining truth of this concept, and if you are listening, you really must anchor this in your mind, is this: presence replaces persuasion.
That statement requires a fundamental paradigm shift. Professional. The vast majority of people operate under the delusion that they
think they need to argue, to over-explain, to logically batter the opposing party into...
Yes, they wield persuasion as a blunt, exhausting... But the masters of influence understand that where physical presence is absolute, your words become almost secondary.
What?
When your presence is nervous or erratic, you are forced to multiply your words to compensate. And 9 times out of 10, those multiplied words still fail.
Because presence does the heavy lift. So let's demystify the actual mechanics of what this presence looks like. It's not about being the loudest voice.
Right. No, no, no.
And it's certainly not about possessing some mystical innate charisma that you were either born with or denied at birth. It's a set of highly specific, trainable, and observable physical cues.
It's the geometry of your posture. It is your relationship with timing. And above all, it is the mastery of
restraint. That might be the rarest commodity in modern communication.
Absolutely. Consider the physical entrance of a person possessing immense, unquestioned authority into a high-stakes environment. What is the one thing they never do?
They never rush.
They never rush. Rushing, whether it's walking quickly to a seat, sitting down abruptly, shuffling papers frantically, or starting to speak the literal millisecond a question is asked, all of these micro-movements broadcast a massive lack of internal...
It communicates a deep-seated nerve.
It signals to the subconscious minds in the room that you harbor a belief that your time and your physical space are not entirely yours. You're hurrying because you feel you're borrowing time from people more important.
The rushing tells the room, I am operating on your schedule. I am eager to please you. I am fundamentally off balance.
Whereas a master commands the geometry before they even part their lips.
They stand steady, rooting their weight evenly. Their shoulders are dropped and relaxed, not pulled up to their ears in a state of, sympathetic nervous system tension.
And when they take their seat, it's a deliberate, conscious action. Their eye contact is masterfully calibrated. It's not a predatory, unblinking staring contest. Signals aggression.
Right. It's a steady, calm, grounded connection that non-verbally says, I am fully present here and I am entirely comfortable occupying this space.
And that deliberate, unhurried pace projects an undeniable gravitational authority. In every single interaction you have today, you face a binary and frantically fill the moments, or you can confidently...
A true leader allows the silence in a room to exist without panicking and rushing to fill it with sound.
They let the outcome of a conversation come to them naturally, rather than desperately chasing it down the hallway with the barrage of anxious justifications.
Wait, if I can challenge this for a moment. If I completely strip away my filler words, and I stand there with the unshakable posture of a mountain, and I use the eye contact of an eagle, doesn't that risk making the actual words I choose somewhat overrated?
How do you mean?
I mean, I could have perfect presence, but if I start speaking absolute nonsense, or if my strategic plan is deeply flawed, I am still going to lose the room, right? Right. Isn't presence merely the foundation of a house?
Go on.
Like, without the foundation, the structure collapses, certainly. But the words, the actual data and strategy, are the architecture that makes the house functional and beautiful. How do we balance the...
That is an incredibly precise analogy, and the distinction is vital. Presence is absolutely not a substitute for substance. If presence is the concrete foundation, your words are indeed the complex architecture. But visualize what happens. You build a magnificent, multi-million-dollar architectural masterpiece on a foundation. The moment external pressure is applied, a highly critical question from a board member, a sudden shift in market data, a hostile negotiation environment, that sandy foundation...
The beautiful, carefully scripted words crack and fall apart.
Yes. The audience completely stops believing the brilliance of the strategy because the communicator's body language is screaming insecurity and panic.
So the presence doesn't replace the need for a good strategy. The presence ensures the strategy is actually received and believed exactly as you intended it.
Precisely. When the physical and psychological foundation is solid rock, even a simple, unadorned sentence carries massive weight. You don't need to dress the strategy up in flowery rhetoric because the presence validates the message.
Once that physical and mental foundation is poured and set, we have to transition to the actual construction of the architecture. How do you translate those perfectly clear thoughts into highly impactful, undeniable words?
This requires a brutal shift from the habit of talking aimless, strict discipline of...
Speaking for results, this is the discipline of actively cutting the noise.
Yes. If you evaluate how most of us are conditioned when we enter a high-stakes conversation, the immediate anxious question looping in our minds is, what should I say?
We're totally focused on our own performance.
But the master of influence asks a fundamentally different, externally focused question. What specific result do I want?
That single internal shift in your line of inquiry changes the entire trajectory of the interaction.
It really does. If you are exclusively asking yourself what you should say, you will inevitably just verbalize your internal monologue. You will talk simply to fill the acoustic air in the...
Or to release your own nervous, pent-up energy. Or to desperately prove to the room how smart and capable you are. It's an ego-driven broadcast.
But if you stop and ask, what result do I want? Your brain's executive function automatically begins to fiercely curate your vocabulary.
It acts as a real-time editor.
Exactly. Stripping away the irrelevant details, the tangential stories, and the defensive posturing simply because they do not serve the ultimate desired outcome.
You literally become an editor in real time. You cut the noise. And we really need to define noise clearly here.
Yes, let's do that.
Noise is anything. Any word, any phrase, any physical tick that weakens the structural integrity of your core message.
Yeah.
The most obvious culprits are the filler words, right?
The ums, the ahs, the likes.
But it's much more insidious than just filler words. It's the widespread habit of over-explaining.
Oh, that is a huge one.
It's making a brilliant penetrating point that lands perfectly with the audience, and then, because you're uncomfortable with the silence that follows, you continue to talk for another 2 minutes.
Effectively watering down the impact of your own brilliant idea, or even more damaging, it is the habit of apologizing for an idea before you have even presented it.
The pre-apology. It's a classic, pervasive symptom of weak conversational architecture.
We hear it constantly. I might be entirely wrong about this, or this is just a rough thought. Feel free to shoot.
I'm no expert here, however.
When you use those phrases, you are actively, explicitly instructing the listener's subconscious to devalue and dismiss whatever you are about to say.
You're handing them the weapon to shoot down your own idea.
True precision means cultivating the courage to say exactly what needs to be said and absolutely nothing. You architect the thought, you say it cleanly, and you let it land.
You let it land. But letting a thought land requires getting exceptionally comfortable with the pause. And that is where most people panic.
Yes, the pause is terrifying.
So let's look at the framework for impromptu brilliance. We've all experienced this exact nightmare scenario. You're sitting quietly in a packed meeting, minding your own business, and suddenly the CEO swivels their chair, points directly at you, and asks for your definitive opinion on a highly complex, multi-million-dollar issue.
The spotlight swings violently.
The biological panic sets in. The heart races. But there is a highly refined, deeply tested 3-step approach to handle this spontaneity with total mastery.
Yes, the 3-step framework for impromptu speaking. It is elegant in its simplicity, but rigorous in its execution. First, you make a short, definitive statement to enter the topic.
And this isn't the answer itself, right?
No, it is the entry point.
Right.
It buys you a crucial second of processing time and grounds your physical presence. Second, you concisely make your core point without any preamble.
And third?
Third, you exit the conversation gracefully and definitively.
Let's walk the listener through a granular application of this. Imagine the CEO just asked you why the Q3 product launch is failing. Step 1, enter the topic. You don't say, and look at the ceiling.
Never.
You look them in the eye and say, that is a critical question regarding our Q3 timeline and market positioning.
Beautiful. You haven't answered the question yet, but you have instantly taken control of the conversation floor with absolute... You didn't flinch.
Exactly. You've anchored yourself in the space. And in the 1 or 2 seconds it takes to deliver that entry statement, your brain's executive function is rapidly organizing step 2. Concisely making the point.
You deliver it surgically. Based on the severe supply chain bottlenecks in our Asian manufacturing hubs, we need to push the consumer launch back by a full 2 weeks to ensure absolute quality.
It's clear, it's direct, there is zero filler, and there are no pre-apologies.
And then we reach step 3, which frankly is where 99% of professionals completely fail, the graceful exit.
Oh, this is the worst part. Most people can make a decent point, but then they realize all eyes are staring at them in absolute silence.
And the silence terrifies them.
So they panic, and they start rambling to diffuse the tension. They say, so yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Based on the data, I don't know, maybe we can look at other options. What do you guys think?
They take a beautifully constructed architectural moment and take a sledgehammer. They ruin it.
They completely demolish their own authority. A graceful exit is definitive and unapologetic.
You finish the point to ensure absolute quality control. That is the safest and most profitable path forward. Full stop.
And then you close your mouth.
You sit in the silence. You have delivered the architecture, and now you rely entirely on your foundational presence to weather the silence and let the message resonate in the minds of the executive.
The pause is not an empty, terrifying void. It is a highly calibrated tool of certainty.
Yes, it buys you the time to think before you speak, and it signals your absolute, unshakable conviction after you.
Certainty. Let's truly dissect that word, because speaking with certainty is a massive, career-defining differentiator.
It really is.
And it's vital that we distinguish what certainty actually is versus what people mistake it for. Certainty is absolutely not about arrogance. It's not about demanding that you're infallible or refusing to integrate new data or bulldozing other people's perspective.
Arrogance is a repellent, pushes people away because it signals a fragile ego that cannot be questioned.
But certainty, however, acts as a magnet.
It draws people in because in a corporate world filled with anxiety and ambiguity, certainty provides a stable... People naturally gravitate toward the person who appears to know exactly where they're going.
The great danger to this certainty lies in the insidious use of what we call softener.
The verbal cushion words. I guess, maybe, possibly, I'm not completely sure, but it seems like...
These words are not polite. They are a psychological defense mechanism.
We deploy them because, fundamentally, we are terrified of it. The subconscious logic is, if I soften the state, turns out my idea is incorrect, I won't be foolish because I never fully committed to it in the first place.
But the devastating irony is that by trying to protect your own ego, you completely destroy your capacity. If you stand up and say, I guess we should maybe try migrating to the new software system, you sound incredibly...
No one wants to follow a maybe.
If you stand up and say, we must transition to the new software system to maintain data integrity, you sound like a visionary leader.
And here is the crucial part. If brand new data comes across your desk tomorrow that mathematically proves the new software is actually a terrible idea, a true leader just pivots with the exact same level of certainty.
They say the new security data shows this is the wrong path. We are immediately reverting course.
There is absolutely no shame in adjusting your stance to new verifiable facts, but there is an immense compounding cost to your reputation. Consistently sound unsure of your own.
But hold on, let me push back on this extreme precision. If I am a listener applying this tomorrow, and I am hyper-focused on cutting out every single fuller word, stripping away every softener, and focusing entirely on the exact calculated result, don't I run the very real risk of sounding robotic?
That's a fair concern.
Or cold? Or aggressively corporate? If precise communication is like a highly concentrated, intense laser beam, which is great for cutting through dense confusion, sure, and aimless talking is like a weak, scattered floodlight, how do we keep the laser warm?
How do we not alienate people?
Yeah, how do we ensure that we don't alienate the very people we're trying to lead by sounding like an algorithm?
That is the essential million-dollar question, and it acts as the perfect structural bridge to our next major area of precision. Ensures you are understood, but being understood does not inherently move people to take action.
Right.
To keep the laser warm, to move from the mere mechanical transmission of data to actual behavioral, we must step entirely out of the mechanics and dive deep into the psychology of humans.
Precision is the intel, influences the emotion.
Yes, because if you're listening to, you must internalize this fundamental, unavoidable truth of human biology and behavior. Human beings make decisions emotionally, and they justify those decisions logically after the fact.
We all possess this deep-seated vanity where we like to view ourselves as hyper-rational creatures, perfectly evaluating spreadsheets, weighing pros and cons in a sterilized mental vacuum.
But we do not. The limbic system, which controls our emotions and survival, processes information significantly faster than the neocortex. cortex, which handles logic and reasoning.
We decide based on how a proposition makes us feel safe, excited, respected, threatened, and then our brain frantically scrambles to find the logical data points to prove that our initial feeling was correct all along.
And if you do not understand that biological sequence of motion first, logic second, your communication will always hit.
You can possess the most perfectly structured, architecturally precise, mathematically flawless argument in the history of business.
But if you have not first connected, underlined their unstated, your pristine logic will bounce.
It is exactly like trying to install a massive software update on a computer before you've established a stable Wi-Fi.
Great analogy. The data is...
To forge that emotional connection, you have to shift your focus entirely away from your own brilliant idea onto the... You have to map the room. What do they actually care about?
What is the unspoken anxiety keeping them away?
Let's use a real-world scenario. Imagine you are a manager presenting a highly complex new workflow protocol to a deeply stressed-out, overworked... The pure logic of presentation, this new workflow increases department efficiency by exactly... But the emotional reality of the team is this is going to save us 2 hours of grinding data entry on Friday afternoon so we can actually go home and see our families.
If you walk into that room and immediately start hammering them with the 20% efficiency metric and the corporate bottom line, they will instantly cross theirs.
They will actively hunt for a reason why the new system...
Why? Because their emotional baseline is exhaustion, and any new system sounds like more work. Their emotional armor is up.
However, if you start the presentation by addressing the Friday afternoon relief, if you say, I know the current data entry process is keeping you here until 6 p.m. on Fridays, and my goal today is to eliminate that burden, you immediately validate their core unspoken desire.
They feel seen, they feel understood, the emotional door unlocked.
Then and only then do you pour the logical data, the 20% efficiency metrics, through that newly opened door.
You give them the logic they need to justify the emotional yes they have already...
Which brings us to the most vital yet chronically overlooked skill required to gather that deep emotional intelligence in the first place, mastering the art of...
And we need to be very clear here, we are not talking about passive...
Right, which is what most people do, just sitting quietly, nodding, and waiting for the other person to stop making noise so you can say the brilliant thing you've been rehearsing in your head.
No, we are talking about expert listening. Expert listening is an entirely different discipline. It is the ability to catch the subtle frequencies that everyone else in the room completely misses.
It is listening to the specific acoustic tone of the voice. Is their voice tight and constricted with anxiety? Or is it open and relaxed?
It is listening to the pacing. Are they rushing through a specific slide because they lack confidence in the numbers?
But most crucially, expert listening is the ability to listen to what is actively avoided in the conversation.
Yes. If you are reviewing a project timeline with a department head and they talk endlessly for 20 minutes about the marketing budget, the creative direction, and the PR strategy, but they entirely avoid mentioning the software integration.
The silence surrounding the software integration is the loudest, most critical piece of data in the room.
The amateur misses it because they are blinded by the words. The master hears the shape of
this. And silence itself is a psychological tool that the expert listener wields with incredible surgical precision.
Most professionals are utterly terrified of silence. They view it as a socially awkward void that frantically filled with sound at all costs.
But the master understands that silence acts as an emotional vacuum.
If you ask a highly targeted, powerful question to a colleague, and then you simply close your mouth and be quiet, the other person will feel an overwhelming biological urge to fill that void.
And in their rush to fill the silence, they will step off their rehearsed script. They almost always reveal their true, unvarnished thoughts, their deeper hesitation, or the hidden agendas they were trying.
The silence strips away their corporate armor. It gives them the necessary space for talking.
And this specific dynamic ties directly into the higher-level concept of leading without dominance.
Because true, lasting influence is never about bulldozing someone in mission or forcing them to agree you're brilliant. It is the subtle, quiet power of shaping the architecture of a conversation using highly intentional questions rather than forceful.
Right, because basic human psychology dictates that absolutely nobody likes being told what to do.
Nobody.
The instant you tell a colleague you need to completely change your Q3 strategy, their psychological defense mechanisms deploy instantly. Their ego is under attack.
But if you shift the approach and ask a calibrated question based on the shifting market data we saw this, is the current Q3 strategy still yielding the specific metrics you hit your annual bonus? You have completely revolutionized the dynamic.
You have entirely removed the psychological resistance because you haven't actually given them anything to push back against.
You haven't made a demand. You have simply placed a highly polished mirror in front of you. You are allowing them the dignity to arrive at the necessary.
And the foundational rule of human psychology is that we are infinitely more committed to executing an idea if we believe we are the original author of that idea.
You architect the path with your questions, you guide them down it, but you allow them to take the physical steps.
And a true master guide doesn't just ask the right question. They adapt the very language of their questions to match the specific neurological processing style of the traveler.
This introduces a fascinating, incredibly deep layer of psychology, adapting to someone's specific communication modality.
Neurolinguistic programming outlines that we generally process the world through three primary modalities: visual, auditory, or kinesthetic.
This is often referred to as and we need to spend some serious time unpacking this because mastering this is like discovering the cheat codes to human rapport.
The VAK model is immensely powerful because it operates almost entirely below the conscious awareness of the listener. When you match someone's modality, you are literally speaking their brain's native language.
Let's break them down intricately. Visual thinkers process the world primarily in pictures, images, and
When they think about a concept, they literally see it in their...
You can identify them by their specific vocabulary. They use phrases like, I see what you mean, or let's look at the big picture, or my view on this is still a bit hazy, or can you shed some light on this?
Furthermore, a highly visual person will often speak faster because they're trying to describe a complex image in their head, and they will often gesture upward or look up when accessing memories.
Okay, so contrast that with the auditory process. How does their brain work?
Auditory thinkers process information primarily through sound, rhythm, and internal dialogue. They are highly sensitive to tone of voice and the acoustic structure of an argument.
Their vocabulary gives them away instantly. They will use phrases like, that sounds good to me, or I hear what you're saying, or let's talk through this, or really resonates with.
Or, we need to tune into the client's needs. Auditory processors often speak at a more measured, rhythmic pace, and they may tilt their heads slightly to the side when listening, almost instinctively pointing their ear toward the source of the...
And then we have the kinesthetic thinkers, which is often the most misunderstood group in a corporate environment.
Yes, entirely. Kinesthetic thinkers process the world through physical feeling, tactile sensation, and emotional.
They need to physically experience or emotionally weigh a concept before they can accept it. Their vocabulary is deeply rooted in physical action.
They will say things like, I can't quite grasp this concept, or let's touch base next week, or I need to wrap my head around this, or that just doesn't feel right to me.
Or this is a really heavy... Kinesthetic processors tend to speak slower, taking longer pauses to literally feel the emotional weight of what is being discussed. They often look downward when accessing.
So let's look at the catastrophic failure that happens when these modalities. Imagine you are a manager and you are an extreme visual. You are pitching a new project to an employee who is deeply kinesthetic.
Okay.
You say, look at this chart. Can you see the vision here? We need to focus clearly on the bright future of this initiative. You are throwing visual words at them.
But the employee, aesthetic, their brain is searching for feeling, not pick. They reply, I don't know, it just feels solid to me. I can't get a grip on the timeline.
In that scenario, you are speaking two entirely different biological dialects. You're transmitting on FM and they are receiving on AM.
If you don't adapt, the frustration will mount in. The visual manager will think the kinesthetic employee is slow or resistant. The kinesthetic employee will think the visual manager is superficial and move.
But if you are an expert listener, you catch those kinesthetic cues, feel solid, grip. You immediately translate your pitch into their native language.
So the adaptation looks like this. The manager catches the cues and says, okay, let's slow down. Let me walk you through the structural blueprint step by step so you can get a firm handle on exactly how this project will run, and we can make sure it feels completely solid before we move forward.
The shift is almost magical. The kinesthetic employee's brain instantly relaxes because it recognizes familiar, comfortable language.
The emotional connection is instantaneous, not because you change the data of the project, but because you change the packaging of the data to match their specific neurological receiver.
But let me pause the entire conversation right here because we must probe the ethical boundary of what we are discussing.
We must.
If you are sitting there listening to this, you might be thinking, if we are actively targeting people's limbic system, if we are analyzing their subconscious VAK language patterns, and if we are invisibly guiding them down a predetermined path using calculated Socratic questions, how do we ensure this is genuine ethical leadership and not just high-level psychological manipulation?
Where is the dividing line between being a masterful influencer and being a sociopathic pupper?
Right.
That is the single most important question anyone attempting to master. It is the crucible. The stark reality is that the mechanical techniques of persuasion and the mechanical technique manipulation are often entirely.
A hammer can be used to build a hospital, or it can be used to break a window.
The tool is neutral. The absolute defining difference, the dividing line, is the intent of the user and their adherence to integrity.
Let's define that, because manipulation is essentially a zero-sum game.
Correct. Manipulation is deploying these powerful psychological extract a unilateral benefit at the direct expense, detriment, or exploitation.
It is coercion disguised as cooperation.
True influence, however, is anchored entirely in this principle dictates that you are acting authentically, transparently, and striving.
You are using these tools not to trick someone into a bad deal, but to remove the unnecessary psychological friction that prevents a mutually beneficial idea from being accepted. You are aligning your strategic intentions with their long-term well-being.
Integrity is the essential guardrail. You have to fundamentally believe that the destination you are guiding them to is actually a good, safe place for them.
Because if you use these skills to manipulate a client into a contract that ruins their business, you might get a short-term commission, but you will permanently vaporize your reputation.
Trust is the fundamental currency of bankrupts that trust in.
Exactly. So, assuming we are operating with absolute integrity, we've established the physical presence, the verbal precision, and the deep psychological connection.
But what happens when the environment turns hostile?
Yes. What happens when the stakes are raised to the absolute maximum? How do we make our message truly unforgettable, especially when the pressure is immense or the message itself is incredibly difficult to deliver?
That takes us directly into the perilous realm of high stakes, and the most potent weapon in which initially sounds contradictory, the fast-paced art of.
We touched on this earlier. Facts inform, but stories stay. If you give a room full of executives a dense 20-page spreadsheet of complex data, they will forget the granular details by the time they reach the parking lot.
But if you tell them a story, you translate those abstract data points into a relatable, visual, emotional journey that the human brain is literally biologically hardwired to retain.
Called neurocup. The human brain evolved over hundreds of thousands on narrative, long before the invention of spreadsheet.
When you merely recite a list of dry facts, only the language processing centers of your audience in Broca's area and light up on an fMRI scan. They are decoding words.
But when you tell a compelling story, their entire brain lights up, their sensory cortex activates. If you describe the bitter cold of a factory floor, their brain simulates the feeling of cold. They are actually co-experiencing the narrative with you.
And to harness this power, you do not need to. The structure of a powerful corporate story relies on a very profoundly effective three-part framework: situation, challenge.
Let's break that framework down for the listener. Situation, challenge, outcome. You are setting the baseline reality, you are introducing the necessary conflict, and you are providing the resolution.
Let's run a simulation. Say you were trying to convince a skeptical, budget-conscious board of directors to invest $3 million in a new automated safety protocol for your manufacturing.
You could just list the injury statistics and the OSHA compliance and watch their eyes glaze over.
Or you can use the framework. Let's script it. First, the situation. You start by setting this. Last year, our primary factory floor in Ohio was operating at maximum capacity, running 3 demanding historic customers. You have established the baseline.
Okay, now the challenge. You introduce the conflict, the spike in tension. But in late November, during the 3rd shift, an outdated calibration machine malfunctioned. A senior operator, a man who has been with us for 15 years, nearly lost his right hand. Production was halted completely for 3 days, costing us $1 million in delayed shipping, but more importantly, the morale of the entire floor was.
You have now anchored the data to a human reality and a visceral threat. Now the outcome. You deliver the resolution. By investing in the specific automated safety, we not only mathematically guarantee that specific malfunction can never happen again, but our pilot tests show we will increase overall production speed by 5% simply because the operators finally found efficiency.
That pitch takes 30 seconds to deliver, but it is infinitely more memorable and infinitely more persuasive than a 60-minute presentation on safety metric. You took the data and you wrapped it in stakes.
But what about when the high-stakes communication isn't pitching a brilliant new idea, but rather delivering terrible news?
Right. Navigating deep conflict, setting rigid boundaries, saying the hard things.
Most professionals avoid this like the plague because they are terrified of losing respect, being disliked, or permanently damaging a vital relationship.
They avoid it, or when forced into it, they bungle it catastrophically by letting their own unchecked anxiety bleed into the delivery.
Delivering difficult truths, whether it is firing an underperforming employee or telling the CEO their pet project is a failure, requires the ultimate synthesis of everything we have: unshakable presence, surgical precision, and deep.
And the cardinal unbreakable rule of saying hard things is to focus relentlessly on the issue, never on the person.
The work is the problem, you're not the problem.
Precisely. The moment you attack the person's character, you are being lazy, you aren't trying hard enough. Their ego instantly engages, their amygdala fires, and the productive conversations permanent.
It immediately degrades into a biological battle for survival. You must focus on the data. The deliverables have been late 3 weeks in a row. Let's dissect the workflow to see where the breakdown is occurring.
And you must maintain a calm, steady, measured tone. And this is where it transitions from a psychological battle into a purely physiological battle.
Yes, the biology of pressure. When you are sitting in a room, knowing you have to tell your boss that you made a massive, costly error, your body perceives that social threat exactly the same way it would perceive a physical predator.
Adrenaline and cortisol flood your system, your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mechanism over.
Your heart races, your vocal cords literally tighten and constrict, and your biological instinct is to speak very quickly at a higher pitch, just to get the agonizing.
Which is the worst possible thing you can do. You must consciously and aggressively counter that physiological response.
When you feel the adrenaline spike, you have to activate your parasympathetic, the rest and digest. You do this through breath.
By taking a deep, controlled breath and ensuring your exhale is slightly longer than your inhale, you stimulate the vagus nerve.
This sends a direct biological signal to your brain that you are safe. It literally slows your heart rate, relaxes your vocal. You must force yourself against every screaming in your body, deliberate,
It is so deeply counterintuitive. When your primitive brain is screaming, speed up, dump the bad news, and run for your life, you have to physically force your body to slow down, anchor your feet, and command the space.
By controlling your physiology and a calm, unhurried, steady tones to the other person's limbic system, this is not a personal attack, but simply a necessary objective we are going to navigate.
This level of self-regulation is exhausting, but it is the exact barrier that separates the master from the amateur. And executing this once in a crisis is a great achievement, but executing it consistently, day after day, is what actually builds a legacy of influence.
Which brings us to the ultimate realization of this entire discipline. Influence is never a singular, isolated event. It is a compounding system of consistency. We can look at this through the metaphor of building a simple income system.
This is a profound metaphor. Let's unpack this. If you suffer a catastrophic financial collapse, you do not recover your wealth by frantically chasing random, complicated, get-rich-quick schemes.
You don't bet everything on a single win.
You recover by acting like a disciplined farmer. You meticulously prepare the soil, you plant the seeds, you water them consistently every single day, and eventually you harvest. It is a repeatable, predictable, boringly consistent system.
And your communication reputation is built using the exact same agricultural mechanics. You do not become a universally trusted, highly influential leader because you delivered one brilliant, cinematic keynote speech.
You build unshakable trust through a repeatable system of clear, consistent, and reliable.
It is the daily watering of the soul. It is the fact that every single time you enter a mundane Tuesday morning meeting, your posture is grounded and present.
It is the fact that every time you are asked a difficult question, you utilize the three-step framework, you pause, and you answer with precision.
It is the fact that every time there is a conflict, you regulate your breathing, remain calm, and address the
E is the compounding interest of behavioral consent. When the people around you experience the exact same clarity, the exact same integrity, and the exact same emotional intelligence from you day after day, week after week, under varying levels of stress, they eventually stop evaluating you on a case-by-case basis.
Their brain categorizes you as safe and authoritative. They simply trust you implicitly. The system produces the reputation.
But let me ask you this, pushing back on the idea of relying entirely on a system. There is this pervasive, romanticized myth in our culture of the natural speaker. The person who just effortlessly commands a room without ever thinking about VAK modalities or breathing techniques or impromptu frameworks.
Right, the unicorn.
When everything is on the line, the stakes are sky high, the CEO is glaring at you, and the adrenaline spikes. How do we actually trust this deliberate mechanical system instead of just reverting to panic or hoping that natural talent will magically save us? I think of it like martial arts.
That's a great comparison.
You learn the precise blocks and the strikes in a calm, quiet dojo. But in a real street fight, when someone swings at you, the conscious mind is instantly overwhelmed. How does this communication system actually survive the chaos of the real fight?
The martial arts analogy is the absolute perfect lens because the answer is deep neurological muscle. The concept of the effortlessly natural speaker is a complete myth. What you are actually witnessing is someone who has internalized these systematic rules so deep over thousands of repetitions that they have become their default reflex.
In martial arts, you do not repeat a specific block 10,000 times in the dojo so that you can consciously think about it during a fight.
You repeat it so that your nervous system executes it automatically when you do not have the time.
The system takes over precisely when the conscious mind is overloaded.
Exactly. If you want this to work in the boardroom, you must practice it. If you practice pausing before you speak in low-stakes conversation, when you are ordering coffee from your barista, when you are talking with your family at dinner, it carves a new neurological pathway in your brain.
If you practice relentlessly cutting filler words and softeners in casual internal email, it becomes your default vocabulary.
So, when the adrenaline hits in the high-stakes boardroom, you do not have to consciously remember the three-step impromptu framework. Your brain automatically searches for the entry statement, the core point, and the exit because it is the path.
You trust the system when the stakes are high by making the system your second nature when the stakes are low. relentless daily practice.
That is where the real alchemy happens. It is not about being a perfect, flawless robot. It is about being...
So let's synthesize everything we have unpacked in this immersive exploration today. For the listener, this is your blueprint. We started at the absolute bedrock foundation, cultivating clear, analytical, and reflective thinking that empowers you to suspend judgment, bypass your autopilot reactions, and respond with intention.
We established the biological truth that your physical executive presence, the geometry of your posture, the calibration of your timing, and your mastery restraint does the heavy lift, replacing exhausting, desperate...
From that unshakable foundation, we constructed the precise architecture of speech, the rigorous discipline of speaking for a specific result, cutting the acoustic noise and filler words, stripping away the defensive softeners, and utilizing the three-step framework to deliver precise, certain messages in impromptu moments.
We then breathed life into that mechanical architecture through the deep psychology of influence, understanding the biological sequence that emotion always precedes logic, mastering the art of expert listening to hear the shape of silence, adapting to visual, auditory, and kinesthetic modalities, and guiding others with absolute integrity.
And finally, we explored how to maintain this mastery under extreme pressure. We discussed translating abstract data into unforgettable narratives using the situation, challenge, outcome framework.
We examined the biological imperative of managing our physiological fight or flight response, using breath to control tones, can say the hard things with respect.
And we anchored it all in the compounding agricultural system of consistent daily communication habits. Mastery of communication is not a genetic gift you are born with. It is a daily, rigorous practice.
It is the deliberate, ongoing alignment of your internal mind, your physical body, and your spoken words to serve a purpose far greater than your own ego. When you master these elements, you no longer merely navigate the corporate or social world, you actively architect and influence its direction.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to carry with you as you step back into your day. Consider the very next conversation you have today. It absolutely does not matter if it is a high-stakes negotiation with your CEO or a passing exchange with the person sitting next to you.
It matters just as...
That interaction is not just a casual exchange of sound waves and information. It is a real-time live audition for your future opportunity. The way you hold your physical space, the pauses you are brave enough to take, the ruthless clarity of your words, they're all actively shaping how you are perceived by the world and dictating exactly what doors will open for you next. It is all.
So, as you walk into that next conversation, ask yourself, are you speaking merely to fill the terrifying silence, or are you speaking to shape your reality?
That is the real question.
Thank you for listening to ZAM Audiobooks. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to follow for more insightful audiobook conversations.